Alrighty, everyone. So, good to see you all here tonight on this very rainy and gloomy night. In the way of announcements, we, of course, about to be spring break. Yay! We are obviously not going to have a meeting over spring break, so less yay. It should be very sad at that. But after we get back from spring break, the weekend after spring break, i.e. like the first spring break, first week of school, that weekend will be the day before Palm Sunday, or that Saturday's day before Palm Sunday. We will be having a debate night that night. Again, well, debate watching night, where we will discuss a debate that's probably going to be on the resurrection. Probably more kind of historical arguments for that. So, given Easter, kind of a special little Easter thing, and we usually try to have one of these a semester. So, at least now we do. So, this is the spring semester version of that, and will be centered around Easter. So, other than that, I think that's about it. I can go ahead and...
I have a take.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of more appropriate to do Easter-related events after Easter Sunday rather than before Easter Sunday.
Well, it's like when we stopped singing Christmas hymns on December 26th, even though that's the second day of Christmas.
Right.
We don't care about the church calendar.
Basically, it's I wanted to have a debate night somewhere in the middle of the semester, and it's close enough to Easter.
And it doesn't matter when, it's always just fun to watch an Episcopalian get beaten.
We need to have a day since last Episcopalian bashing. Anyway, alrighty. Do you want to introduce?
Sure. Yeah. So, my friend Dan Ray is here tonight. We're very glad he drove. I'll have you know, like 2 hours and 20 minutes to get here. So, we appreciate him making a long trek. He lives west of here a ways, but he has a master's in apologetics from what's called Houston Baptist. Now it's Houston
changed Baptist to Christian.
Yeah.
Because they got too many denominations.
Yeah. So. He works now with Watchman Fellowship as a full-time apologist, the organization. If you were here when James Walker talked about the cults, he's with that organization, so he's doing lots of good stuff, has a podcast he'll tell us about, edited a book that I contributed to, which I think he's also going to talk about, so I'll just turn it over,
All right.
give you as much time as possible here, but glad to have you.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, Alan, how long I've known you? For 20... It's been 6 or 7 years.
Yeah,
So,
something like that, yeah.
So here's a fun thing. How many of you know, I don't know if it's going to work. No, it's not. How many of you know?
There's that red one over there. That's good.
A red one?
Yeah.
All right.
This one has been written with recently.
Okay, all right. So how many of you know of a guy from the 18th century? He was interested in something in the sky. He's French.
Hey, Messier, Charles Messier.
Charles Messier.
Messier, whatever.
Messier, probably.
Messier.
He has a catalog, right?
Yeah. So he has a catalog of 100 things that you shouldn't. Well, at least in his day, he was looking for comets, and so his telescope wasn't the greatest. So he'd find fuzzy things in the sky. He's like, "Don't look at that. See, these fuzzy. I do like it." But those 100 things have turned out to have been some of the greatest and most fabulous astronomical objects known to man, galaxies, nebula things. But for Charles, he did not like this. So here's a trick question. If that's how you pronounce Messier, how do you pronounce that? Copier. Sorry, just having one crowd, right? So yeah, Professor Copier. That's got a magnet on it. That's wild. You can do a
Technology.
magic trick. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about some myths between the history of Christianity and science. And now I want to tell you that I'm not just making up myths about myths, because as a Christian apologist, people that are not Christians, especially atheists, the word apologist is just like circus clown. And so a lot of times I've gotten accused of making stuff up where there is no stuff to be made up, straw manning people's opposition to Christianity. And so I'm not doing that, and I gave you all a card. On the back are QR codes to keep you busy for the next 2 semesters. Profiles from our ministry, 4-page profiles, articles on these topics I'll be talking about tonight, and podcasts related to these topics. A lot of the people that I'll be mentioning tonight, I've talked to. So what I'm getting into is actually stuff that I've researched, worked at, looked at for my own interests and professional and personal. And so the stuff I'll be sharing with you tonight is stuff I've actually encountered and actually have engaged with, both Christians and non-Christians, about these ideas. So before we get started, I'd just like to pray real quick. Thank you, Jesus, for what you've done, you with the lives of the students here. Help me and help these wonderful young minds to understand, help me to understand, help us to understand your role and who you are as the creator and Lord of this physical universe and our lives. Thank you for this opportunity to share with students what you have shared with me, and I pray it is a blessing to everyone in Jesus' name. Amen. So tonight we'll be talking about science, defined as the study of the physical world and all its associated phenomena, generally employing a methodological naturalistic assumption, that is, omitting God as an explanation for anything. Now, you don't have to be an atheist to be a methodological naturalist, but most big science departments, like here at UTD, operate on a kind of assumed methodological naturalism. That is, God is just not an explanation. You can say God did it if you want to, but that's not what we're trying to do in the laboratory. And so that is a definition of science I'll be working with, just an examination of the physical world. Keep that. Just any questions about that definition? And you can ask me questions at any time. Science is the English equivalent of the word scientia. Latin just means knowledge. That's all it means. Scientia has been used since the 14th century. The word scientist is a relatively recent term introduced by William Weedwell in 1833. So the word scientist is only since 1833. It was weird. Before scientists, they were called natural philosophers. It was a philosophy of understanding the natural world. But now the philosophy department and the physics department don't really talk to each other. But good philosophers are good. Good physicists are good philosophers. They should be, anyway.
Absolutely.
Because they are doing philosophy. But sometimes as a Christian in a university like this, our faith feels like that sometimes. The Bible in a test tube, the whole world's just like, yeah, Bible, whatever, interesting, science experiment. But what does it say? The bigger picture is that science used to be considered in Christian history as the queen, or not the queen, but a handmaid, that the queen of the sciences was theology. And science and the knowledge of the natural world was a subset. You looked at the natural world through the lens of theology. But now we look at the world through the lens of science, and theology is just kind of a personal preference, like what do you like to eat at Brahms. And that's kind of what religion has been relegated to. It doesn't have any place in a scientific setting. And sometimes it does kind of feel like that. But science has kind of come out of its shell and has kind of taken over as the preeminent way in which we view the world. A lot of people just assume that. If you lived through COVID, how many of you lived through COVID? Okay, great. Glad to have you.
I wasn't even born yet.
Okay. All right. But there was a big push on, what were people saying? Follow the science, follow the science. And I'm not criticizing science at this point for that. I'm just saying that it's just the lens through which, the lens and the air and the water in which we swim and breathe and move. But, sometimes our faith feels small. If you've been a Christian for any length of time, I've been a Christian for 30 years, I'm an adult convert, 31 years now, and sometimes my faith feels small. I don't feel like, I'm an adult, and sometimes I feel like a child. What happened to my faith? Why am I know what God has done in my life in the past, why now all of a sudden do I think God's just going to drop me like a stone? But that's what the world does to us sometimes. But I want to point this out to you. How many of you have been to Cambridge? Some of you might be going to Cambridge in grad school. How many of you want to go to Cambridge in grad school? How about that? Well, if you go study science at Cambridge, you'll be studying at the Cavendish Laboratory.
I've been to Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Excellent. Well, this is Cambridge in England, in the UK. And the Cavendish Laboratory is where you would study science. Now, this little gentleman in the shadow here is, anybody know?
Henry County.
James Clerk Maxwell. What did he do? He united the theories of electricity and magnetism, and showed that they were both sides of the same coin we call light. And so he was the one responsible for what's on the door, right over the door of the original lab there. It's from Psalm 111:2. Great are the works of the Lord. They are studied by all who delight in them. And when they built the new physics lab in the 1970s in Cambridge, guess what they kept? That verse over the door. So don't let anybody tell you that, religion has nothing to do with science. James Clerk Maxwell was a Christian, and he made one of the most prominent discoveries about light still to this day. Electricity and magnetism. Pretty cool. But that's over the door at the Cambridge lab in the UK. So that's the equation that he came up with that shows electricity and magnetism kind of go waving together equals paching light. Forgive my crazy PowerPoint.
You should have had those posters that said, and God said.
I have a T-shirt that has and God said in Maxwell's equation. Yeah.
Do you have that one? You have so many.
I need to have that one.
But before Einstein and the photoelectric effect and all the photons and everything, we had Sir Isaac Newton and Christian Huygens, I think is how you say that, who were debating the nature of light. Newton believed it was particle-like, and Huygens believed it was wave-like. So this debate was going on long before Einstein, quantum mechanics, and all that kind of stuff.
And they're both right.
And they're both right. So Einstein actually got the prize for it. He got the prize not for his theory of general relativity, but for the prize in 1922 for the photoelectric effect. If you shoot a laser at some metal, you'll get some electrons flying off the metal plate. That's what he got a Nobel Prize for. See how easy it is to get a Nobel Prize? Just shoot some lasers at some metal and kill a bunch of electrons, and woohoo! The people in Sweden will give you money. So if you guys think of an experiment, you can come up with something a lot. You have creative minds. You have a Nobel Prize experiment in your brains right now. I can see it in your faces, in your eyes. I can feel the vibe. There's a Nobel Prize winner in this room. You can do it what he did. You can do it, like they say in the water boy. You can do it. So this is the late Anglican priest turned physicist, John Polkinghorne. And he's just saying here, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but he's just saying how in physics, he's making a comparison here to Jesus. Now, if you know in Christian Orthodox theology, what is Jesus? He is fully God and fully man. And so why wouldn't light be just as enigmatic? Fully particle, fully wave, depending on how you look at it. And that's the comparison that Polkinghorne and many others have made. Now, John Polkinghorne was an Anglican priest who was a physicist. So he knows what he's talking about. This isn't just some guy on social media going, hey, you know what, I made a discovery. No, this is serious stuff. That light, God is light, the Bible says. And so why wouldn't light reflect one of God's invisible attributes, to be fully God and fully man? People are still puzzling over this, right? It's probably why Einstein couldn't match his socks and his hair went all over the place. I don't know, maybe. He played the violin, did you know that? So, these are some scriptures that emphasize the doctrine of God as the second person. This comes from the Westminster Catechism, the shorter catechism in the 17th century. That God, the second person of the Trinity, being very and eternal God of one substance, equal with the Father, did, when the fullness of time was come, take upon him man's nature. God as man for man. That's one of the most remarkable things. Whatever you think of Jesus, he's the centerpiece of human history. Everybody has an opinion about him. I work for Watchman Fellowship. We deal with hundreds of cults, aberrant religions, New Age movements, other world religions, and every one of them has something to say about this man, Jesus of Nazareth. They're all wrong, but they all have something to say about Jesus. Even when aliens come into people's bedroom and start talking about stuff out in space, they say, pay no attention to that man from Nazareth. Not Vishnu, not Allah, but the aliens in your bedroom are very concerned about what Jesus said and did. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, what does that tell you?
What's that tell you about aliens? Anyway, so I want to go forward with how should we picture the kingdom of God? Or by what parable shall we represent it? Who said those words? Jesus. Mark chapter 4, verse 30. The physical universe is a parable, guys. It's not just Emily Dickinson and John Donne and Dante and Shakespeare. No, God's the original poet, and his words made stuff. The playwrights, they could decorate a stage, right? They could write some fancy lines in a book, but when God spoke, he made these things. He made stuff. His words made things. And so the universe, everything in this universe, from birds to black holes, reflects something of God's invisible attributes. And so if you're looking for it, everything in the physical universe can be a parable. Everything. Jesus used a few. He gave us some examples from nature. Jesus used parables from nature. What did he say? The kingdom of the heavens is like what? A seed. Like water. Or being born again is like the wind. Right? These kinds of things. He loved to talk about nature because he made it. So be looking for kingdom parables throughout your life as well. So I want to keep in mind as we go forward with these concepts about these conflicts between Christianity and science. It's not an us versus them. Remember in Joshua, he comes before the angel before they're about to go to battle. And he asks the angel, are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, no, I'm not on either side. It's not about sides. It's about Jesus being on the side of God. We human beings, we like to take sides and create division. And so what I want to do tonight, even though I'm showing you that there is conflict and division between, currently, the discussions between Christianity and science, the conflict really isn't between us. The conflict is a spiritual one. So, we are undone by encounters with God himself. You know, you hear these people who die and come back to life and write books about how there's lollipops in heaven. You ever hear these people? Yeah, pay no attention to them. Because if they're true, they're actually extra biblical, and now we have to keep asking that guy what heaven was like. Now, why is he suddenly the authority of heaven that has absolutely nothing to do with any of the descriptions that we have in the Bible? How can we check to make sure he's telling the truth? We can't! So don't listen to them, because they're not true. Because when men and women encounter God, especially the ones that encounter the risen Christ, they can barely stand up. They can't speak. They're not fist bumping Jesus and drinking chocolate milkshakes and eating Big Macs on God's throne, like some people say. No, they're actually pretty terrified. So we're going to go through and keep in mind when we're talking about conflict, this is not us versus the scientists or the scientists versus the Christians. This is an entirely spiritual problem. So the first conflict is the conflict thesis. There is a deep, almost irreconcilable conflict between Christianity and science. And one of the things I'm trying to intentionally do is put Christianity before science, because all the time in debates like this, what do you hear? Science and faith, science and Christianity, science and religion. Notice what's just naturally coming before that, as if it's subjugating Christianity just in the verbal aspect of it. Right off the bat, Christianity's taking a back seat. So number one, in Colossians, through Christ, God has created all things. For him and by him and through him. All things have been created through him. This is his universe. He made this stuff. And he was in the world. That's the Greek word cosmos in John. He was in the world, the cosmos, and the cosmos was made through him. But here's the remarkable thing. The cosmos did not know him. None of us would be here were it not for his grace. We would not know it on our own. We're not smarter than other people. Jesus has revealed himself to us so that we can proclaim him to other people. So, this is a book. You might want to take notes of these things. I have a lot of these references on the card. That you'll see a QR code come up if there's a reference to something I say up here. I don't want to read these. You can look at them while I'm talking. But I want to point out the book, Galileo Goes to Jail and Other Myths About Science and Religion. The big myth here is that science and religion are in constant conflict. And we're going to talk about two people, Andrew Dickinson White and John William Draper. Historians of science have known for years that these two gentlemen's accounts are completely, radically fabricated. Okay, so there's two men from the 19th century who were responsible for this idea of what we call the conflict thesis. Some people call it, scholars call it the White-Draper conflict thesis. The only conflict the only real conflict in their books is the one in their own mind about the way they're perceiving religion and science, as we'll see. So I'm going to summarize this.
Can I make a quick note about that book? It's
Absolutely.
interesting. One year I was referencing that in a talk at UTD, and one student came up to me and said they were actually reading the book in a class at
Excellent.
UTD.
That's excellent.
Because it's a very
It's a great
academically
book, and it's not a
respected book.
It's not a super Christian book. There are some, I don't think they're all Christian authors. But here's just a summary in cartoon fashion. This is a cartoon from the 19th century. Ha, take a look. Who's coming out of the water? Bishops and popes, right? So I want you to take note. I don't mean to offend if you're Catholic. I don't mean to be offensive here. But the big conflict between these two gentlemen was anti-Catholicism. Okay, this is 19th century. This is mid-19th century. Darwin's publishing Origin of the Species, and Draper and White, as most Americans, this is mostly an American phenomenon, don't like Catholics. And so Catholicism has become the punching bag for Draper and White to excoriate Catholicism as a means of holding back science. You've probably heard that before. Christianity or religion holds back science, keeps us embedded in superstition, that kind of thing. Well, this is coming from Draper and White. All right, so Draper, this is just a quick summary. The rise of scientific inquiry was on the rise. Darwin published his Origin of the Species, the first really comprehensive treatise about how biological life may have developed sans a God. In this same era, Charles Darwin and the geologist Charles Lyell, Darwin was a geologist before he was a naturalist, their whole goal was to get rid of Moses as an authority in looking at the natural world. In other words, Moses' ideas looking at the world theologically, they were sick of it. They had enough of that. Let's do our own thing. So the tale of the two Charleses, they wanted to create a schematic. So you've probably all seen that rock strata in textbooks, right? The lines of the ages with colors. That's Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin. And just to point out, there is no place on the planet where that strata actually exists the way it's drawn by Charles Darwin and Charles Lyell. It's inferred. Now, I'm not saying that there may be some truth to it, but that's the schematic that they used to get rid of Moses. At the very bottom, I mean, up until a couple of centuries ago, a lot of the Christian scientists and natural philosophers believed in a young earth creation. And that's until recent with Darwin and then modern cosmology, this age has expanded. So for Darwin and Lyell, this was a huge advance because now we can actually do away with Moses. If the world is this old, then woohoo, Moses is gone. Where is he in all of this stuff, right? In some sense. And that's not the complete story. But Catholicism was viewed in the mid-19th century as superstitious, dogmatic, anti-science. Science was viewed as freedom, truth, non-dogmatic, testable, but this is a false dichotomy that cannot be tested in science. In other words, you can't say that religion holds back science. You can't test that in a science lab. What kind of science experiment do you do to test that religion hinders science? How do you do that? What do you put a bishop in a test tube? You put a Christian on a hot plate? You put a Bunsen burner over a Bible? What do?
You create several different communities with the stated goal of them producing more science, where we want to quantify that, and then leave them for a few hundred years and plot that based on how religious they were.
And then that's a pretty good summation of how science developed in the West. That's exactly what we did.
In the Christian culture versus the non-Christian cultures that didn't.
We get so much science in generally Christian Europe and not in generally Taoist Asia.
That's an excellent question. And what, you know the answer? I think you sound like you know the answer. You know?
That Christianity both states that there is a God and there's an objective truth, but also that you can learn about him, which led to intellectual curiosity, and the Catholic Church founded stuff like universities and colleges and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And basically the big concrete foundation of all of that is that if God created the universe, which they think he did, then the universe would be discoverable and intelligible. Yeah. So naturalism has no basis for why the universe is intelligible. You know, it's like finding a book on your doorstep, don't know where it come from, but I can read it. Why can I read it? Well, that's mathematics. Why is mathematics so useful in describing the physical universe? You have a whole department dedicated to the mathematics of the physical universe called physics. Where do these numbers come from? Nobody knows.
What happens if we just those numbers by 1% or so?
What happens when you tweak the numbers about our physical cosmos? You don't have a physical cosmos.
Side note, when you say physics is just mathematics, you're forgetting that experimental physicists exist.
No, well, it's a branch of physics, but there would be no experimental physics without physics, foundationally speaking. Now, physics will tell you that physics is the foundation of all science. It kind of is. because without atoms and
There's
molecules.
several physics people here
Right,
that would
yeah,
agree with
so-
that anyway.
I guess there's an argument going back and forth about that, but yes, you're right, absolutely. There are theoretical physicists that don't deal in physical things, but in theoretical constructs. There's like theoretical cosmologists, they build models and things like that. So Draper writes the book, A History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science in 1874, and then a newspaper critiqued Draper. He's not a historian. He's not unprejudiced. He doesn't cite his sources. The newspaper called them balloonings. That's a good term. He's making stuff up. His book is an immense pretension. So when this came out, critics were aware of how nonsensical it was. And that's where you can get the article where that comes from. But scholars and laypersons alike are still repeating Draper's bunk version of history. Now, White was the founder of Cornell College, the first secular university in the United States right at the end of the Civil War. No Christianity in the curriculum. Wow, why did we do that? Because he thought he was doing Christianity a favor. White did not consider himself an atheist. He thought by purging Christianity of all of its miraculous stuff, that he was doing Christianity a favor. Now science could advance because now we don't have to deal with miracles. That's Draper's thesis in a nutshell. So his book, 1896, The History of Warfare, Science, and Theology in Christendom, is like Alice in Wonderland. Same kind of thing. How many of you ever heard skeptics criticizing Christianity because we all are flat earthers? Have you ever heard, well, in the olden times, people would say the medieval Christians believed in a flat earth, and their nonsense held us back from discovering the world as a sphere. How many of you have heard that? The medievals were idiots, right? They didn't know anything. Okay, but that comes out of White's book. White made this up. He made up the story that Christopher Columbus was going to prove that the world was round and not flat. That was not the debate in Columbus's time. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella knew the world was a sphere. What they were arguing about was how big it was. They had no idea North America existed between Europe and Asia. That was the discussion, not whether the earth was flat. And when White goes to try to prove his thesis that Christians believe the earth was flat, he cites two people, and one of them wasn't even a Christian. It was a weird Greek philosopher from the 6th century. That two people doesn't make a consensus that all of Christendom believed the earth was flat. That's nonsense. But that comes right out of White's book. They weren't atheists, they were Christians who thought they were doing the church and science a favor. Oh, they did all right. Not what they thought, though. So, Alvin Plantinga says there is a superficial conflict, but a deep concord between science and theistic religion. So, Plantinga's argument, have you ever heard the evolutionary argument from naturalism? Basically what that is that if evolution is true and our minds developed from particles and then molecules and then neurochemicals and neurons, we can't trust it. And if I can't trust my mind, then I have a defeater for my own presupposition of naturalism. That's the argument that he's using. So this is C.S. Lewis. If I believe that naturalism is true, I can't really trust the conclusions of science. That's it in a nutshell. That comes from the essay C.S. Lewis, His Theology Poetry. So does that make sense? That's the real conflict, is between naturalism. Naturalism is the real conflict. If naturalism is true, then there's no basis upon which we can trust the conclusions of scientists whose minds are just molecules and neurons. Questions so far? Questions so far? No? Am I talking too loudly? Just let me know. Fall asleep if you need to. Take
So, you could argue as well, like from just the fact that the founders of modern science were predominantly Christians.
Yeah.
And they didn't define science the way you did on the early chart. They weren't trying to exclude God at all.
No.
They were looking for how this divine mind set up this rational order in nature.
Right. The philosophy means philosophia. What does that mean? Love, wisdom. A philosophia of the natural world. A love of wisdom in the natural world. God's wisdom in the natural world. Natural philosophy. This is Neil deGrasse Tyson in an interview in 2014 with Bill Moyers, just so that you know how far forward this conflict thesis goes. Here's Tyson's take. If you have a religious philosophy that is not based on objective realities, that you want to put in a science classroom, then I'm going to stand there and say, no, I'm not going to allow you in the science classroom. We've all just violated that rule, haven't we? Here we are in a science classroom. Isn't that great? I'm not telling you what to think. Okay, Neil. I'm just telling you in the science class, you're not doing science. This is not science. Keep out. That's when I stand up. Otherwise, go ahead. I'm not telling you how to think. Now, here's the issue. Is Neil's thoughts science? Is this whole claim he's making science? No, but he's saying that in a science classroom, so he's violating his own standard, right? I'm a scientist making up a philosophy that says you can't come in if you're a Christian. Well, that's not scientific. How did that get in the door? Isn't that a religious philosophy? He has a particular philosophy of religion that science and religion don't mix, but he gets to use that in his science classroom, but we can't do that in his science classroom. So that's Neil deGrasse Tyson. Nice guy, but I'm not picking on Neil. These are the ideas. Remember, it's not us versus them. So that's what this point I just made. Okay, so according to the natural theory, naturalism, that thing from Homer Simpson, great-great-grandpa didn't yell at clouds, he was a cloud. This is from the late agnostic astronomer Robert Jastrow, Red Giants and White Dwarfs. Now I'm being a little bit provocative here by saying this, but here's the gist of this. The universe, according to naturalistic theory, if there is no God, has to have some kind of parent something or other for everything else to come into existence. And in the early universe, without God, you have a hydrogen cloud. That's the beginning of the universe in a naturalistic theory. Now, I'm not saying that there wasn't a hydrogen cloud. I'm saying that if there is no God, then the hydrogen cloud is responsible for our existence. Because in the current theories, this hydrogen cloud existed, condensed and formed population 3 stars. Those all went supernova to create heavier elements, which created population 2 and population 1 stars. Those went supernova, and that supernova of all of those stars, we're told, created all the carbon and all the heavier elements in your body. So without God, your creator is a hydrogen cloud and stars that have gone supernova. That's it. Parent cloud of hydrogen. Now, I'm not saying that the hydrogen cloud didn't exist in the beginning of the universe. Maybe it did, but this is a kind of religious philosophy. It sounds almost religious. The parent cloud of hydrogen. So this is kind of a play on words with Darwin here. With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the conviction of a man's mind, which has developed from the mind of the lower animals, I crossed that out and put a cloud of hydrogen, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust the convictions of a hydrogen cloud, if there are any convictions in such a cloud? And then Alvin Plantinga says, the gist of this is, if naturalism and evolution are true, our cognitive faculties would not be reliable. We wouldn't know one cloud from the other. There's just two clouds independently existing. You have your cloud truth, I have my cloud truth. There's no way to tell which one is physically right or wrong. So here's some aspects of the physical universe that are actually supported by Scripture.
So to sort of propose a counter-argument to the whole clouds thing, one perspective that I've heard is that it makes sense that the mind is somewhat accurate because an accurate mind is more likely to be fit for survival. That a mind that accurately reflects the state of the universe around it is more likely able to make good judgment calls in the sense of, should I eat the poisonous thing or not, or is there a threat nearby? So what would be the best response to that sort of position?
Good, excellent question. I think the key to that question is teleology. So you hear evolution, when you talk about evolutionary theory, you hear it explained as though it has the goal of survival. Like everything from a monkey's ear to a peacock's tail can be explained in terms of the species is just trying to survive, including us. But if naturalism is true, the whole idea of survival being a teleology of living organisms is unsupportable. How do you know? Well, naturalism doesn't have a teleology, because you could just look at the history of life on Earth and realize that there's a whole lot of death too. So maybe evolution is just a giant meat grinder. It doesn't want people to survive. It's out to kill everything that's alive. Why wouldn't it be that way? Why did you pick survival over non-survival as the sort of the end goal of evolution?
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be an end goal, just a thing that happens.
Yes, yeah.
Natural
I
tendency.
mean, natural selection is going to tend to preserve things that survive and reproduce.
Yeah.
So I get that, but I think that's the whole point, right? Is it's optimizing for mere survivability and not for rationality.
Yes, that's the good point, Alan. There's survivability does not necessarily mean instinctual, rational things. There's a lot of things in our lives that we don't need for survival, but yet we have them and delight in them and can't seem to do without them. So there seems to be the issue is one of, if you're just trying to survive, then there's really no, the moral framework, the rational framework is called into question, I say, at the very least. So in order to say that, well, my mind was adapted for surviving, you're employing a rationality that is unjustified. Why would survival be something that my genes should do? Or what's the reason for my surviving? Well, there isn't any. Well, then what's the point of knowing whether or not I should eat the poisonous leaf or not? It takes advantage of our rationality, but it doesn't explain or give it a ground, as Christianity does. Our rational minds are made so that we can understand the universe and understand who God is. But under naturalism, the rational mind really is without an explanation, without a foundation. So I think the best thing is to what you said, is the rational component of it really is what's missing.
It could explain, I would agree that evolution could explain some of it, but it seems that humans, just the rationality that we have in understanding quantum mechanics or early cosmology, it just goes way beyond what seems
beyond survivability.
Reasonable.
Yeah. We talk about survivability, but then we're well far and away beyond just merely huddling in a cave and lighting fires and drawing stick figures on cave walls. We're well beyond that. If that's all we needed to do, then we can just jettison all this other stuff.
And sometimes surviving better might involve believing lies, just so you're like,
yeah, you can
overly
believe
cautious
something
or something.
that's absurd if it's causing you to survive. When my atheist friends say, well, why do you believe in nonsense? I just say, well, it's for my survival. You can't ding me for it being false. It's just something I'm using for survivability. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
But yeah, not every Christian. I'm not sure what myself to think about the evolutionary argument against naturalism. Maybe has a tiny bit of force, but it's debatable.
I think for me the problem is the assumption of rationality. The whole idea of even the question itself, that what is the mind in terms of, animals don't have minds, and species have survived a lot longer, just as long as we have, without the kind of minds that we have. It seems like there's something else about the human mind that exceeds any minds in the animal kingdom. But yet they've survived alongside us, so what's the difference? Is there any? Are they willing to say that our minds are no better than a primate's, or birds, or chimpanzees, or a dinosaur?
And I think they would be more likely to point to a quantitative difference, so to speak, than a qualitative difference.
Yeah.
But it is still fundamentally the same sort of mind, just more advanced.
Yeah, they just amp up they tried to do that with phrenology and the size of the mind, and the size of the brain and everything, but that's a good question, and it takes a lot of thought, and the one thing to be sure is not to be dismissive about that if somebody brings it up. It's a good discussion point.
I think so.
Seth has had it up for a while there.
I was just going to ask, what exactly are we meaning by the parent hydrogen cloud?
So
I've never
Jastro's
heard that
quote was
term
just
before.
from a perspective of a non-Christian. I'm not saying that there wasn't a hydrogen cloud at the beginning of the universe, but the idea is that if God does not exist, then our ultimate existence is in.
It has to be traceable
It
back
has
to
to be
that
traceable
early
to
universe
something,
state.
back to something.
Okay.
Back to
And
the
in an
earliest-
unguided way where there's no agent guiding
No
or
agent.
Yeah,
directing
sure.
or intervening
Sure.
or anything.
I've just never really heard that said as like a specific like hydrogen cloud. I guess with like the bare base hydrogen and helium like materials that happened after the Big Bang and after like cosmic
Jastrow
decoupling.
just starts.
but-
Jastrow picks. He was an astronomer,
Yeah.
so he just picked the hydrogen cloud.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, certainly you can
had
draw.
a few elements
Yeah,
beyond
you can-
hydrogen,
I was
but
about
it
to
was
say.
pretty limited.
It was-
yeah.
You can still draw it back to like
You
earlier
could.
states,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the
I'm
same
not
argument.
saying- right,
Yeah.
right. I'm
I-
not saying that was the final stop. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with the argument. I was just kind of wondering like what that was meaning. Okay.
Gotcha.
So what exactly differentiates a religious claim from a non-religious claim? Like you call that that hydrogen cloud thing a religious claim.
So,
what makes something religious claims.
So in a sense of-
not religious claims.
as we would define a religion at Watchman, it would be something that is somewhat transcendent, has a transcendent ideal, something beyond ourselves, something that gives us meaning, something that is a meta-narrative, something that involves ritual and dedication and discipleship and an investment of time and money and resources. So in that sense, when you're talking about the physical world, in terms that mirror those of what we would understand as traditional religious practices, that's what I'm saying, that there's an echo in the vocabulary of religious
So
sentiment.
if they're trying to establish some kind of like meaning in life, or like, or like, you know, presents all this as some kind of transcendent reality, that's a religious claim.
In some sense, yeah, there are similarities in the vocabulary and the vernacular and the purpose and the meaning of what they're trying to do. So a lot of physics and science, when they're talking about ultimate questions, when you listen to a NASA press conference, the scientists will go before the government, petitioning the government for money for programs, and oftentimes say, we want to know where we came from, why we're here, where we're going. Big existential questions that no telescope can solve. But it sounds really cool when a scientist says it.
Yeah, I just had a general question about my experience in science.
Mhm.
I was a biology teacher before I became a historian of science. And the big scandal, ultimately in the 19th century, was macroevolution, the idea of species transitioning
Yeah.
from one to the other.
Mhm.
And in the course of my science teaching, and then the history stuff, I realized the argument was being made, it wasn't individuals that were evolving, it was populations. And gene frequencies were changing over a very long period of time that would allow this result of this family tree, this family tree result. And so, like, I think I'm pretty confident here at the university, those are the elements of how it's taught. Now, here's the question about gaps. One thing I was taught in my exposure to apologetics was the idea that the gaps are too big. The gaps, like, between random chance and design are too big. But in biology class, like, for example, that image of the monkey at the typewriter trying to type a line of Shakespeare, the idea that the monkey cannot randomly type that line, no matter how many times it tries, right? The gap is too big. But the theory of natural selection was actually organized differently from that. And there's actually a program online that mimics what they think is the process of mutation, reproduction, and then selection. And you can get to the line in Shakespeare in like 23 to 46 generations, something like that. But you need those three processes: mutation, reproduction, and selection. And so the random typing is actually not the way the biology works according to the professors that I've had. It's that three-step process that can allow macroevolution to happen. And of course, I know this is scandalous because for Christians, humans are created uniquely in the image of God, right? So at Baylor, for example, they've had a lot of issues with how science is taught there and stuff like this.
Sure.
But my question ultimately for you is, how do you feel about BioLogos or the American Scientific Affiliation and their relationship to these issues?
Well, I think first, to just a quick comment on what you said about the models that give us the Shakespeare from the mammals. I think what that demonstrates for me, I mean, I have no formal background with biology, was that you needed intelligent agency to program a computer that could get the desired outcome. And so when I'm told that a model achieves something that seems impossible, I said, well, it was front-loaded by software engineers. So there's design being passed off as non-design. And I have a little bit of an issue with that. I'm not saying it's impossible, I'm just saying that's something that, but to your question about BioLogos, I interviewed Deborah Hallersma a couple of years ago on our podcast. And I asked her how, in general sense, how theistic evolution worked. And I followed the arguments. And Deborah's a sweet, wonderful woman, and she's a cosmologist by trade, and I didn't understand a word of what she was saying. And I read her books, and I read up on, I've always read up for my interviews, and it was so difficult for me to follow that we decided not to air the program because our listeners would I mean, I didn't get it. I'm not saying I'm smart. I'm not even saying I'm smart. I really tried to distill down the bigger ideas for our listeners. But that was a really difficult muddle that I couldn't sort out. And I couldn't explain it. And I felt uncomfortable not being able to explain what she was talking about. I don't want to put it out there because I can't explain it. So that's kind of the gist of it. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's really messy in my own opinion.
I would say that we're venturing further and further
Yeah,
away
we're
from
getting
the
off the
core
time.
topic here.
Let me talk about this really quickly. Cosmic insignificance, you probably heard this. Copernicus, in the 16th century, allegedly dethroned us. He found out we're outside and we're running around the sun, and that there's nothing significant about us, that we're small, right? But this myth assumes that being in the center is good, and being outside the center is bad. So, is that necessarily a judgment that we can make? Is it always objectively true that if you're in the center of something, it's always good? And if you're on the peripheral, it's always bad? What if it's controversy and you're in the center? Is that good? So that's one problem, because the myth says that we should be, that medievals believed that the earth was the center of the universe. Well, they did, and I'll show you why in just a second. This is the pale blue dot. This was taken in 1990 at the suggestion of Carl Sagan, who was an astronomer. It was taken by Voyager, some 93 million miles away. But that's Earth. Can you see it? That's Earth. And so Carl Sagan was an astronomer and a planetary scientist, and he said that, here's the quote. Our posturings are imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged place in the universe. Are we deluded to think we have a privileged place in the universe? Is that a delusion? Are we special, or we're not? Our planet is a lonely speck in the great cosmic dark. In our obscurity and all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save ourselves. So Carl Sagan, when he's talking about saving ourselves, he was in the 1980s. He was against nuclear war that was proliferating in the 1980s. That we were looking like we were going to destroy ourselves, and every so often we seem to exhibit that tendency. But the cosmic insignificance, here it is. On the scale of worlds, to say nothing of stars or galaxies, humans are inconsequential, a thin film of life on an obscure and solitary rock of lump and metal. Inconsequential humans. Does it mean, if we're small, does that mean we're insignificant? That's the fallacy.
Ask a particle of anthrax.
Huh?
Ask a particle of anthrax.
Ask a coronavirus particle, How small do you have to be? How big do you have to be significant? 6'5", 6'2"? What's the size?
If I eat more at Brahms, am I more significant than I was?
But here's a 4-page profile. This is on the back of your card. This is a profile we did on Cosmos, the television series back in the 80s. That's Carl Sagan's daughter, Sasha, a wonderful woman. She's an agnostic. We interviewed her. That's a video interview I did with her. She was wonderful. She's not a believer. And we had a great conversation anyway about her dad and about what it was like growing up with Carl Sagan. That's on the back of the card. This is Alexander Blankin. He's a cosmologist, a Russian cosmologist, emigrated to the United States. He studies cosmology, the origins of the universe, and he's here speaking of the Copernican, the insignificance myth, that Copernicus reasoned that the universe was not the center, Earth was not the center of the universe, and took us out of the center of the universe. And so now, we're not at the center of the universe, but the sun is an unremarkable star. Now, I think the sun is pretty remarkable. It's the only star in the universe that has a planet with Starbucks going around it. Or Brahms, or whatever you want. There's no other star in the solar system with a Brahms. So I don't think that is unremarkable. I think that's pretty remarkable. Now consider this. What if tomorrow you heard in the news that the James Webb Space Telescope snapped a picture of some aliens going like this? What would that star where that planet is be insignificant? No. Suddenly that star is significant. Well, why do they say this? Why? This is the only star we know of that has a planet with life on it. That's significant.
And it does science.
And it does
if you
science.
love science.
It enabled him to do science, right? Okay, so he says we are reduced to an absolute cosmic insignificance. Is that science? Does science tell you that you're significant? No. Size does not equal significance. Your location in the universe does not equal significance. If you lived geographically in the center of Dallas, does that mean you're significant or not? If you're the geographic center of the United States, Nebraska somewhere, I think, are you significant? Because you're in the center of North American continent somewhere?
Is there something weird about like devices accidentally getting pinged to that location somewhere?
Yes, I've heard that story before. So maybe you're getting alien vibes. I don't know. Good point. All right, so I want to show you in 10 seconds, about a minute here, what cosmic insignificance sounds like from Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Who's an engineer and not a scientist.
So I remember thinking, I am just another speck of sand. And the Earth, really, in the cosmic scheme of things, is another speck. And the Sun, an unremarkable star, nothing special about the Sun. The Sun is another speck. And the galaxy is a speck. I'm a speck, on a speck, orbiting a speck, among other specks, among still other specks, in the middle of specklessness. I suck!
That's the cosmic insignificance scale. Why is he so vehemently enthusiastic about saying, demeaning himself like that? There's an undercurrent of anti-religious sentiment in Bill Nye. He doesn't like Christianity or religion. So if he can demean himself, translated, that there's no God. I'm a speck, I suck. So in medieval times, let me tell you what the center of the earth was like. It was a dome. Medievals didn't believe it was a throne, everything was happy, hunky-dory. Yeah, they believed, in the medieval times, there was no indoor plumbing. So you had a chamber pot. You ever seen one of those? What's a chamber pot? Y'all know what a chamber pot is? It's a big bowl, usually porcelain, like a plant-sized bowl, and you do your business in that, and you dump it out the window when you're done. Out into the street. So this was a common occurrence. You can imagine what the streets smelled like in medieval Europe. And there's a story that King Louis IX of France was walking down the street one day and got a chamber pot dumped on his head. He went upstairs to see who did it, found it was a college student studying for exams, and the king gave him a scholarship, all covered in muck. But that's what the medievals believed about the earth. The earth was like a street in medieval England, and everything in the universe fell to earth. It was not a nice place to be. It was a cosmic sump, a sewer. So when Copernicus came up with, hey, we're not at the center anymore, people are like, yes. Not like, oh no, we're dethroned and we're not special anymore. We're like, no, good, no more chamber pots from the universe. So this is just another quote. This is another quote from a book about Galileo goes to jail. And you guys want to talk about aliens? Or the Galileo? Let's talk about Galileo a little bit, real quickly. So, Galileo. You know that Queen song? Galileo?
Yeah.
From Wayne's World. Yeah, before Wayne's World. It was before Wayne's World. Galileo, Galileo, Galileo. We will not let you go.
Very good.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so this is an important debate, and I'm going to try to speak in your vernacular here. So that's Maffeo Barberini, who later became Pope Urban VIII, the center of controversy in this controversy about Galileo and the church. And that's Galileo Galilei. And basically, as one author describes it, the battle between Galileo and the Pope was a battle between two intemperate men. This is David Bentley Hart, who says this: measured against centuries of ecclesiastical patronage of the sciences, and considering that in Galileo's day and long after, many of the world's greatest and most original scientists were natural philosophers, often in fields that had not previously existed, one episode of conflict among proud and intemperate men does not exactly constitute a pattern of Christian intellectual maleficence. In other words, two men fighting doesn't mean that the whole of Christendom hates science, but that's how it's translated. This is a spat between two friends, and one of them was kind of a jerk. Even though he was a Christian, we can all be jerks. It doesn't mean we're perfect in our temperament. Galileo was a little saucy, and for no good reason, really, with his friend Maffeo. Before Maffeo became Pope Urban, they were friends. They talked, they had a chat, and then when Maffeo became Pope Urban VIII, they had more chats. Let's talk about this heliocentrism, Maffeo. Okay, sure, great. everything seemed to be going well. But Galileo was a little bit of a hothead, kind of jealous, a little intemperate, right? He'd be really good on Facebook if he existed. This is what he would post. That's Galileo's book in a nutshell, in Facebook vernacular. Look at the likes and the comments and the shares on the bottom there. His little spat went viral in a day and age without computers. This was a viral disagreement that still lasts to this day. 107,000 comments, 103,000 shares, 228,000 likes and emojis and all that kind of stuff. But let me tell you a little bit of background about this, the Simplicio comment.
Real quick, I want to say this.
This is our friend Richard. He is going to be in our book club tomorrow night. I want you to join us if you can. Richard's point here, and I
Real quick,
to play it, but Richard is saying that really what keeps us on our screens is not kittens and dog videos, it's controversy. Controversy. Technology has figured out that that's what we watch the most of. Fights, debates, screaming and shouting, Karen videos, instant karma videos, bad road rage driver videos, Walmart people getting angry with each other videos, controversy, people yelling at each other.
Cart narcs.
Yeah, so the algorithms are designed to where the guy that speaks and yells the loudest gets the most likes. So this is a painting by Vermeer in 1688, called The Astronomer. This was one of the first paintings that was stolen by the Third Reich and Hitler for his Hitler Museum. On the back of this original painting, I think it's in the Louvre, I don't know where it is now, there's a Nazi swastika stepped on the back of it. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Monuments Men, a great movie where there's an American contingent of soldiers that go in and try to recover all this wonderful European art. That's in the movie. But this astronomer has a book open in front of him that says, "Seek inspiration from God," as Vermeer had dictated what the painting would be. So this idea that Christianity and science aren't compatible is mythical. So here's the gist of the Pope Urban and Galileo conflict. They were friends. Galileo and Urban had several meetings about the Copernican theory of heliocentrism. Okay? Galileo wrote his book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, from 1629 to 1632, after he had his conversation with his friend, who is now the Pope. Of the four characters in the dialogue, he's a dialogue, there's four people, like on Facebook, debating. It's like a Facebook debate. But there's a character called Simplicio, the one who is opposed to heliocentrism. But Galileo portrayed him as an idiot. But guess who Simplicio was? Maffeo Barberini. He didn't say it, but Maffeo knew, and everybody else knew who Simplicio was. Why did he do that? He didn't have to do that, but he did. And that's how the conflict ignited. And then, as you know, Galileo was strong-willed, opinionated, and competitive, jealous. He didn't share his data with anybody. He burned bridges with many who disagreed with him. He treated Johannes Kepler with some contempt. So the church was a little annoyed by him. Not the church, but the Pope. His former friend. Why did you diss me like that, Galileo? Well, I don't know. I just think you're an idiot when it comes to the heavens. So did Galileo go to jail for this? Well, I won't read it to you, but here's the article. This shows you how Galileo sort of traveled around Italy after the trial. Not quite a house arrest. He did stay at his house in Rome, but he freely traveled. He had servants. He had a nice, his house arrest is a vacation, is a multi-$1,000 vacation. I'd love to go to Rome in a villa, be fed by servants. That's not
Florence.
a house arrest.
Yeah, those are some nice places there.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
So he went around. He traveled around. Had been interrogated, but he was never tortured. He was never, threatened with torture or treated. Everybody kind of appreciated him, and even though he was a little bit of a rascal. So you can read up more about the whole thing here, but really I can boil it down to, there's a lot of nuance and back and forth about this, but how would you like to be remembered for one outburst of anger over the course of your years? How many of you have foolish things that you're just glad that didn't get on YouTube, right? Everybody's, yeah. See, I have some of my idiot debates with atheists where I'm a stupid person. It's all out there to see, where I'm just not, it wasn't my greatest moment, but it's out there for the world to see. There's a video of mine where the guy just wanted to argue with me and shut me down and make me look foolish, and I just got depressed, and I was like, I don't want to keep talking. I didn't say that, but then the video's got like thousands of views, and like all the comments are like, Ray, you're an idiot. So I was like, oh, I'm getting off social media. It's awful.
Yeah, just a comment. So I spent some time having to deal with the Galileo story, and he did insult him by putting his words in his mouth as Simplicio. My understanding is that the Pope told Galileo that you can entertain Copernicanism as a hypothesis, and then Galileo does his thing by making the Pope look like a fool.
Yeah, exactly.
Now my understanding is he was threatened with torture, and then he recanted.
I think, I don't know, but I'm not confident enough about that part of the story myself to be able to say for sure that that's what happened. I had read about that, but standing here tonight, I'd have to go back and look and see myself. I don't know, because I read some things where people said that's a little bit of an exaggeration. But I can't confirm or deny that actually happened. I'd have to go look at it myself.
Well, the reason I mention is the Roman Catholic Church did not reverse its position on geocentrism until about 1820, 1830. And Luther and Calvin, I'm pretty sure that they were opposed to Copernicus as well.
Yeah, Luther thought Copernicus was a goofball in terms of, well, not him personally, but he thought his theory was goofy. But I'm going to get to that in just a second. I want to show you the speculative nature of cosmologies in that time period.
You did mention the time period, like, that sort of laid the background from all of this in the previous time. Well, the text mentioned it, but you didn't really point that out. What's interesting about the whole heliocentrism, geocentrism thing in the Catholic Church is that, when Copernicus, during Copernicus's time, the Catholic Church didn't really respond to Copernicus and even greeted the theory with open.
Well, he was such a congenial, under the mat, low key kind of guy.
With open arms. Well, I guess that's one factor in it, but I think it may have been in the post-Tridentine, like after the Council of Trent, sort of. There was an attitude in the church that was, I don't know, it was more.
Circle the wagons kind of thing.
It was much more.
The Counter-Reformation.
Yeah, the Counter-Reformation. During the Counter-Reformation, the church was kind of more like, it was, I guess, more paranoid.
Yeah, I had some of the social background of it certainly was the Reformation, Counter-Reformation tension. But I think my point tonight would be to point out the interpersonal relationship between the two men that is sometimes overlooked.
Yeah.
And why Galileo was unnecessarily kind. I talked to the Vatican astronomer a couple of years ago about this very conversation. So that's Brother Guy Consolmagno. He's the official Vatican astronomer at the observatory at the Vatican. He does astronomy and meteorites, and he's in our book, The Story of the Cosmos, as well. But I interviewed him, and that's on the back of your card as well, and we talk about the Galileo issue. It is 8:12, and I didn't get to aliens, but I will briefly. What am I going to do here? So I want to show you the Drake equation. Yes. This is an equation to figure out how much alien life is in our galaxy. Made by Frank Drake in 1960. Zero. So where are they? Drake predicted there should be 10 to 20,000 civilizations in our galaxy. Frank Drake died a couple of years ago. No aliens have been detected. There is no evidence of any extraterrestrial life whatsoever. A couple of years ago in 2017, this little space rock that looks like the Millennium Falcon came zooming into our solar system from outside of our solar system. It's the first extrasolar entity that has ever been tracked or recorded by modern astronomy. And this gentleman, Avi Loeb, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He's a Harvard astronomer. He thought that that was a debris from an extraterrestrial spaceship. And he has a whole book about it. He's dead serious. It's called a Muamua, the name of the object. And it means messenger from afar. And he thinks it was alien technology. And we can't prove it, it's gone. But he has a whole book on that. He thinks it's alien technology. This is a rundown, if you want to take a picture of this. This is a rundown of UFO phenomena in our culture beginning in 1947. Going all the way up until today. This past summer, a guy named David Grush testified before the U.S. Congress that our government is hiding crashed alien craft and alien bodies, non-human biologics. That created a sensation. You've probably seen some of the crazy Air Force, declassified Air Force military UFO videos. Those kind of made the rounds. So we're still dealing with UFOs here in 2023, 2024. What are they? Here's David Grush. That's UFO journalist George Knapp, David Grush, and Jeremy Corbell, who's been on the Joe Rogan Experience a couple times. All these gentlemen believe that there are aliens, and we have evidence of it to some degree. Here's Hugh Ross. He's a cosmologist. Did a podcast with him about this very topic.
UFO or UAP phenomena is not new. It goes back thousands of years. Thutmose III reported an encounter with a UFO in his records. That dates back 3,000 years.
So Hugh and I talk about UFOs. That's Jeff Zweerink. He's a cosmologist also at Reasons to Believe, where Hugh Ross is. I did 2 podcasts. There's 4 episodes. With Jeff, I talked about the possibility of extraterrestrial spaceflight and the physics of the universe. And then with Hugh, we talked about aliens and alien abduction and the spiritual dimension of UFOs. So that's on the back of your card as well. 4 episodes on the podcast about that. I got to finish up here really quickly, and then we'll have a minute for questions. Here's my podcast with Jeff. This is kind of funny.
You just can't get around the difficulties of traveling across the universe. The challenge of moving across the universe is daunting, to say the least.
How do you move a spaceship through the universe?
Things are so far apart, it's crazy.
There's a great peril just in, am I going to run into something that'll rip my ship apart?
So if aliens exist, they have the problem of interstellar space travel. But the gist of this is, guys, is that a lot of researchers and sociologists and scientists think that if aliens showed up, that Christians would be the most troubled by it, that our theology, our Christianity would be jeopardized or changed radically, our thinking about God and Jesus would be radically altered because aliens would show up. This is a very serious thing that people are saying, that if religious people would be the ones that would be most affected by this. But this is completely untrue, actually, because as Hugh Ross and Jeff Zweerink say, the only worldview that can incorporate what these alien beings might be is Christianity. Physics has no explanation for how things can defy physics, the laws of physics, or what beings are that show up in people's bedroom, as I alluded to at the beginning of the universe. I was talking to Mormons this past summer in Utah. I was handing out podcast cards about aliens. And I was having a conversation, because Mormons don't like anti-Mormon literature, so I had to do another approach. And I said, well, here's a card about aliens. I did a podcast on aliens. What do you guys think about aliens? Talking to Mormon missionaries. Oh, they're really cool to talk about. And so I said, what do y'all think about aliens? Oh, this and that. Maybe they exist, maybe they don't, because Mormons believe in other worlds. And so it's an interesting question for them. And they say, well, what do you think about aliens? I say, well, I think aliens are fallen angels that show up in other people's bedrooms with aberrant messages about Jesus. Now, if you know the story of Mormonism, that's exactly how Mormonism got started. Joseph Smith had an angel appear in his bedroom. But anyway, Hugh Ross, Jeff Zweerink, we here at Watchman, we believe that the unexplained physical phenomenon of these aircraft that people see flying about, Hugh Ross points out that the technology of alien observation craft has followed our technology. That's weird. If, 50 years ago, the Zeppelins, and now it's just sort of these physics-defying machines. And then Hugh also said that alien abductions, very real, but they're always interested in denying the person the divinity of the work of Jesus. So it gives you kind of a clue as to what's going on in people's bedrooms at night. And usually people with alien abduction stories are often involved in the occult in some way, shape, or form, or they have been. So our conclusion is that aliens are demonic. And there are alien cults out there on the internet right now, including this guy.
What's the reason for this demonstration? Well, we believe that the air ministry and the government of this country know that flying saucers exist.
1958, people were saying, our government knows aliens exist. So it's an age-old issue, but I knew I ran through that really fast. I'll wrap up. It's time for Brahms.
So, what are your thoughts on, okay, so we circled around to the alien topic again. What are your thoughts on, ancient alien attempts to explain the events of the Bible?
Nothing. We did, I did a podcast on that. I spent a couple of months reading up on the ancient alien question.
Like saying that, they got, when Moses was talking to God, he was actually talking to an alien. Things like Jesus came back to life because of alien technology or
No,
something like that.
the assumption behind ancient aliens is an evolutionary one. And it means that there's no way these ancient civilizations were smart enough to make temples or carve stones or make these intricate designs or whatever the case may be, whatever your argument is, that there's no way these people could have done this without advanced technology. And the only thing that we know of that could be advanced technology would be aliens from another world. And so that's how the thesis really goes, that those people are too primitive. We're super advanced, we have technology, but they didn't. We can cut stones, they can't. How did they do this? Aliens.
There was also someone, okay, that's not, I think it is as well. Okay, no.
Alex's question may be more centered on the religious aspect.
It's more centered on attempting to invoke aliens to explain weird religion, to explain
miracles.
Yeah, it gets back to what I was saying earlier, is that
not just buildings.
Right, exactly. I understand your point. Thanks for clarifying. I think that the point still remains is that if you look back at human history and what I said earlier about cults and world religions, everything points back to denying what Jesus has done. Right. So that is a spiritual attempt, and I would say, in a very simplistic sense, that the deception of since the fall in the garden is very real, and Satan goes out and makes war and tries to rob, kill, steal, and destroy. And so deception is one of his primary tactics. He's been observing us for millennia, and he knows what we'll fall for. So I think that's just a deceptive tactic to deny the miracles, deny the Bible.
There's really no evidence. They're pointing to that fact, right?
So saying that just like this by pointing at a miracle and saying this wasn't actually a miracle, it was just advanced alien technology or something.
Yeah, there's absolutely, as Alan just said, there's absolutely no substantive archaeological or textual evidence of that kind of thing. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that your belief is that alien abduction stories and UFOs, UAPs and stuff can be understood through some kind of spiritual or demonic lens.
Not all of them. I didn't get a chance to nuance the argument, but a lot of them can be.
If they're true at all, you're saying it's probably demons.
So yeah, I feel like that can kind of work for stuff we see here on Earth, but I draw a line between those kind of sightings and stuff and just the idea that an advanced alien civilization could exist somewhere.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'm not.
Okay. So, and if we were to find that some alien civilization exists, 1,000 light years from Earth, they've never contacted us before, anything like that, would that then shake the Christian faith?
I don't think so. I think for me, I'll just speak for myself. I can't speak for the planet, but if there's something out there, I think if there's anything out there, it's more along the lines of minute biological, kind of stuff. But even if there were to be some sort of Neolithic, ancient, advanced civilization, whatever the case may be, I would say that God created them, and for whatever reason, He's kept us separate from them, and never mentioned them to us, which is fine. God doesn't.
He's under no obligation.
He doesn't have to tell us all the details of everything that He
didn't mention a lot of scientific facts in the Bible, so
I think that my response would simply be that would just be another wonderful facet of discovering a new species on Earth or a new structure in the universe or something like that. It would just be. I think it would shake up. I don't think they're entirely wrong that some Christians would really freak out about that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's also C.S. Lewis's space trilogies.
Yeah. No, good
I
question.
mean, Kepler thought there was probably people on the moon and stuff living.
There were medieval theologians were debating people about living on Mars.
A lot of Christians traditionally didn't have a problem with it at all. I mean,
no, as long as your speculations, and that was with Pope Urban and the heliocentrism, it's okay to speculate. That's fine. We're not going to put you to death for speculating. but don't let it exceed the bounds of our theological knowledge. In other words, if somebody came to you on this campus and said, hey, I had an alien visit me, and we've got this little small secret study group going on where we talk to the alien and we channel things, and he tells us new revelations about Jesus, then you can kind of,
That sounds more demonic, yeah.
Yeah.
But those are, alien cults are out there, and that's what they do. And we didn't get to the Urantia book, but that guy that you saw in 1958, he was the founder of one of the current UFO cults that is very active in recruiting and evangelizing.
That's the like celestial seasonings tea cold bread.
I don't know what the name of it is. The Aetherius Society is one, and they use the Urantia book, which is an alien, a book about 4,000 pages allegedly channeled by aliens through a human being in the 1950s, in the 1930s. A third of the contents of that 4,000 pages denies who Jesus is.
Wow.
That's also the one that like categorizes people into like different colors, like the blue people and orange people.
Yeah.
Okay,
The Urantia
so
book,
celestials.
yeah. It's fascinating. But anyway, I'm sorry guys, I know I did a lot of information in it way longer than I needed to. I hope that was, I
That's good
apologize.
stuff.
I should have made that in 2 presentations. But it's the first time I've done that presentation to the group before, so thank you for me to go out.
Alrighty. Well,
Okay, well, thanks a lot.
we are going to Brahms tonight afterwards. So
Great.
anyone who wants to join.
All right.
Grahams.
Is your